All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Daniel Erickson. I am a senior in the College of Arts and Sciences studying economics, but really my passions lie a lot with education policy and youth empowerment and education policy. So this work that I'm about to show you today is kind of the culmination of some work that I've been doing since my sophomore year of high school. So in many ways, this is a true passion project. So if we look here, we kind of have the three main simplified stakeholders in education policy. We have the lawmakers who are creating the policies and instituting them and figuring out what kind of parameters, principals, faculty members, and students are going to be learning with. Then we have the principals and the faculty members, the teachers who are actually instituting those policies and making those connections with students. And then we have the students who are kind of at the tail end and actually the whole reason behind education policy in the first place. The problem is that when it comes to making decisions, students are almost never involved. All education policy related decisions are made from the top down, and students are constantly reacting to new regulations, new standardized tests they have to make, new kinds of overall parameters that they're figuring out on their way to graduating high school or any sort of academic success that they're looking for. So my project kind of involves figuring out how to get students involved in this kind of decision making so that we can get every student the best opportunity to have academic success, graduate high school, and pursue whatever they want to do in their lives. So in the next few minutes, I'll be kind of breaking it down into what I think of as a theory of change as to a kind of digestible model that different communities can use in order to use student voice to raise student outcomes and improve education policy as a whole. So the first stage right here is identifying a problem. And again, this is based on work that I've done in Tampa, Florida, and work that's been going on kind of across the country in education-related literature involving youth voice. So the first step is kind of identifying a problem. So this is usually done at the school level. This can come from either the faculty members, students, or so on. And so this is kind of figuring out exactly what kinds of problems, what barriers students are facing on their path to graduation, path to academic success. So an example is in my high school. This is a very simple example. At our first Student Alliance meeting in which students were kind of proposing these kinds of problems to their faculty members and teachers, an example of this was we had this tardy policy. And the tardy policy was if you were even 30 seconds late to class, you would have to go to this central repository in the middle of the school, sign in with the assistant principal, and then you might be 10 minutes late and then show up to class. So you might have originally only been 30 minutes late or 30 seconds late, but now you're 10 minutes late to class. So this kind of inefficiency seems so simple, but it actually was something that our principal had never even thought of. The fact that, the students who are late to class are already maybe not motivated to attend class. And so we need to figure out how to actually get those students in the classroom instead of having to have them have more time outside of the classroom. And so talking about this tardy policy was something that was so simple, but it was identifying this problem that many students were facing on their path to academic success that was started this relationship between faculties and students and was able to kind of bring this partnership together. So once we have identified the problem, now comes the real process, and this is where I think this model really kind of is new, and that's really sharing power and transferring responsibility from parents or teachers and lawmakers to the students. So this can be a formal or informal process. This can be an actual student group that meets regularly with the principal and says, here's a problem that's being faced by students at our school. We'd like to make this kind of change. An example of this is in Tampa. There's a historically African-American high school called Blake High School, and there was a lot of divisions inside of the school. There were people from rival neighborhoods. There was a magnet arts academy program that was bringing in students from outside of the traditional district, and then we had the local population. So there was a lot of different kinds of barriers that students were kind of seeing among themselves, and so they wanted to bring students together into some sort of unified school feel. And so the project they decided to take on was having a lot of programming around Black History Month. And so what the students decided to do was they would have pep rallies related to famous African-American alumni of the school, and they eventually actually culminated in a whole walkout in which students would, with the approval of the principal, they walked to the local movie theater and they saw the movie Selma. And it was a very good unifying example of the students coming together who might have not have necessarily spent time with each other because of rival neighborhoods or different backgrounds, but were coming together because of school unity. And And in subsequent years, we saw uptick in graduation after we saw these students taking on this policy. And so it's these kinds of decisions that are being made on the student hand that is able to make these kinds of radical changes, especially when you're talking about getting 100 to 50 more kids to graduate per year. And so once this sharing power, and I kind of touched upon this in the previous slide, but once this real sharing of power happens and the responsibility of decision making turns over to the students, we need to start being able to actually take real reformed action. So an example of this is at Armwood High School in Tampa. There's been work involving 9th grade readiness. There's all these numbers and statistics out there that if you fall behind on graduation requirements starting as a freshman in high school, it's very unlikely that you're going to graduate. And so a lot of the upperclassmen in the school decided to create a mentoring program in which 11th graders and 12th graders would meet with struggling freshmen and say, what's going on in your classes? How can I help? Oh, I took this teacher beforehand. Let me see how I can help you out with that class. These kinds of conversations that, especially when you're talking about getting that kid who might fall through the cracks to get them to graduate, it's these kinds of personal connections and this kind of action that's taken that really starts to make that change. So what really makes this model, I think, really different is the types of students who are making these decisions. So traditionally in a lot of high schools, the decisions, especially the influence among the student body, is done through the student government president, the quarterback of the football team, these kinds of very outgoing students who are traditionally succeeding within the parameters of the school. And that makes a lot of sense. That's great. There's a certain role for those kinds of students. But this model specifically encourages the voice of those who the system does not work for. So throughout this process, I've interviewed a lot of decision makers, principals, superintendents, and so on in the Tampa Bay area. And Hillsborough High School principal Gary Brady puts it best as when you're creating this kind of model, whenever you think of a student who might be this kind of leader, it's not that person. It's not the student who you think of first. It's the student who you might raise their hand a couple times in class and might have really great ideas, but isn't necessarily the person who's going to always put their opinion out there. Whenever I think about these kinds of students and the kinds of people who I'm looking for with this kind of model, it's the student who's the leader of the lunch table. At every lunch table, there's a student who kind of creates the vernacular, starts the slang, wears a different kind of brand t-shirt, and other students will follow them. It's these kinds of students these kinds of students are the voices that we're looking for when trying to get those things to change, because if you really want to change a system, it doesn't necessarily work to just ask the people that the system is already working for to make that change. So here's just a picture of students who have done this kind of work. Every student in this image was in the bottom 10% of their class and not ready to graduate as 11th graders. And through these are Blake High School students, and through the school unity programs that they did and the amazing work that they did involving bringing students from different neighborhoods together, different cultures together, and trying to create an actual school, Blake High School culture, not only did they have improve outcomes for their peers, but all these students ended up graduating with honors throughout this process. So it's cool with the fact that not only are the students who are gaining this responsibility, not only they're helping their peers, they're also helping themselves as well. So this is a very sustainable model. Throughout this process, I've also created a toolkit that I'll be producing through the Wheelock College of Education that I believe other communities will be able to use to replicate not only work that's been going on in Tampa, Florida, but also some work that's been going on across the country and some education-backed literature that's been going on for about the last 50 years involving youth empowerment and education policy. So thank you so much for your time. Chip?
So I know you said that this was focused obviously in Tampa, that being what you're most familiar with.
Yeah.
But you also mentioned that you want to come up with you're working on the toolkit that you might distribute in a further way. Would that require work to sort of fine tune, or do you think this is something that applies very universally and is just something that we've been missing out on in education?
Yeah, so one kind of area that I decided to focus my toolkit on is what are the most sustainable parts of this process. So while I could have just done a case study, and that's part of my toolkit that definitely documents what specifically works with Jefferson High School or schools that's been going on in Tampa, Florida, I tried to pull out the most sustainable parts. So the kind of outline that I showed you with the identify a problem, share power, take action, that's the most simplified and replicable part of this whole process, I believe, as opposed to some of the more nitty-gritty details specifically that are culturally specific steps that were taken in Tampa.
In terms of like actualizing this education reform, so if you were actually to implement this program or your toolkit that you're proposing, who do you need buy-in from? Like, what are the different stakeholders at a high school level even that would need to be able to adopt it?
Yeah, so this model not only works, at least in my experience, not only works at the school level, so it can be instituted with a principal or an assistant principal taking it on and the students within that school taking on this model and then working together within a high school. But actually it has multiple levels, so the high school could take this on, but then an entire community, which has gone on in Tampa, Florida, can take this on as well. So the superintendent has bought in, and then the superintendent all the way down to janitors and custodians through the school, through every high school have taken this on. So it's kind of it can either happen at the high school level or at the district, state, or even potentially the state or national level as well.
Thank you.
All right, you're welcome.